on Wednesday, there was a big press release with the governor, and I see Devin, I know with CCAT, and all of the different entities are tracking and putting a lot of time, and there's lots of conversation around that bill, and we have Sarah Grant on the call, and so I want to make sure we have time to talk about those. Before we get started, I want to just take a moment. We've been really lucky. We have Shaylee is going to slide over. We have an intern who's joined us. Shaylee is graduating from the University of Wyoming next week in political science. And she reached out because she really likes tracking the legislative work and trying to learn and navigate that. So she'll be joining me for these, maybe even in the future, presenting one of the bills to council. And so I just wanted to take a moment and introduce. Do you want to say anything, Shaylee?
Yeah, hi guys. Thanks for allowing me to be here today. Like she said, my name's Shaylee Lingle, and I appreciate you guys allowing me to be here.
Awesome. And a little side note, Shaylee's dad has worked in Broomfield PD for many, many years. So she's very connected, and we're glad to have you. So with that, just some of the things before we get kicked off, I just wanted to mention, I'm sure you're seeing in the news, it's been a very contentious week in the legislature this week. You can see the late nights and the lack of sleep and the stress starting to catch up. I'm sure you saw that Speaker Garnett had to do a major speech about decorum and respect and trying to get people back on track. And that's because we're in the heat of the legislative session. So this is kind of, I think, the most fun time. The bills that were non-contentious, that we're going to pass, right, have passed, have been signed by the governor or awaiting the governor's signature. The bills that were probably going to be PI'd or postponed indefinitely kind of have already been postponed indefinitely or not introduced. And now we're into the heat of the big ones where there is a lot of contention and right where that compromise and the rub comes together. So it's been fun to track if you see it all on the news. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and start. One of the big changes just that's been on council's radar is around some of the elections bills. So I'm going to pass it over to Todd, and we'll start with elections, and then we'll go into transportation, since those are kind of the big ones right now. And then we'll just do catch up on the end with any of the ones that are left, depending on time. So Todd, do you want to give some updates on those?
Sure, thank you. The biggest news is that Senator Klobuchar yesterday introduced an updated version of the For the People Act. It is 873 pages long. And since it dropped yesterday, I'm not completely sure what the changes are going to be, but it should be very positive. The senator has worked with representatives from the National Association of Election Officials and National Association of Secretaries of State and State Election Directors. So we expect positive changes. We expect floors instead of ceilings, that sort of thing. So I will get an updated summary in next week's CMO update. In the State House 1071, which is the ranked choice voting bill for nonpartisan elections, will be heard next Tuesday at 2:00 in the Senate State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee. We do expect a couple amendments, one from the Secretary and perhaps one from Senator Finberg. So as soon as we see the amendments, I will shoot those out to you guys. Okay. And then the Colorado Elections Omnibus Bill has been introduced. It does update a few provisions that will affect Broomfield. It removes the ability for unaffiliated presidential candidates to pay a fee to get on the ballot. It eliminates future vote center or ballot box sightings at standalone police or sheriff stations. It updates the recall laws and the language around especially special district recall. And then most of the other stuff is just codifying best practices into law. And so those don't really affect Broomfield because we're already there. So, and that's the elections bills that are really hopping right now.
We can't hear
Danae,
you.
I think Danae, you're muted or we can't hear you.
Something doesn't look like she's muted. Audio didn't work. Are y'all sharing a speaker in the chambers? Maybe it has something to do with you're connected to Todd's audio and he's muted. I don't know.
Are there any questions? We do depend on IT. So I'm gonna give Danae my laptop.
I was just gonna say, the world when IT's not in the same room with you, you realize how much you depend on them. So, are there any questions about the elections bills? Okay, all right, then I think we'll, I see Devin's looking forward to the amendments on the ranked choice voting bill. Us too, Devin, we are watching that closely. So, great, then we'll move on to transportation, and I'll work on fixing my mic. Sarah, do you want to jump in and start talking about the bill that was introduced just a few days ago?
Sure. Thanks, Danae. And can everyone hear me okay? I've been having some audio issues, so just want to confirm. Thanks for the thumbs up and the nods. I'll try to keep this brief, but I have included these updates in your CMO legislative update, including the slide deck summary that includes some of the changes that have been included in the draft bill that went out last Friday in the CMO update, and the bill dropped on Tuesday officially at the Capitol, which also there was a press conference by the governor, the state sponsors, and others. Sorry, Todd, you have your hand up? Oh, okay, I just want to be sure you didn't have a question or something to say. So I've included a link to that 1 hour press conference in your CMO update as well. But bottom line, as we've covered in previous sessions with council and in other legislative updates, that this transportation bill will save Coloradans money and time spent on our roads, invest in our rural infrastructure and mountain communities, as well as investing in our 10-year plan that CDOT developed in coordination with stakeholders across the state back in 2019 and in 2020, including millions that will go towards projects that are important in Broomfield and the Northwest region. It will also create a transportation system that supports a dynamic economy while improving air quality. It invests in infrastructure to help Colorado lead the transition to electrification and electric vehicles by 2035, and improves air quality by addressing mitigation regulations before federal and state sanctions force top-down and very costly measures. And 3, establishes a funding sustainable source for our transportation system by making sure that that funding is available consistently over the next 11 years and stabilizes those revenue sources. So some of the changes in the new bill, we actually were able to identify some new revenues, which include additional general fund transfers. And that's kind of a key part of this bill, is that the new revenue is coming from fees, but also general fund sources as well, which they've heard from stakeholders across the state that it's really important to also use the existing sources of funds. So overall, the bill will raise $5.2 billion over the next 11 years to support transportation, and including those new fees, which would be $3.7 billion in revenue, as well as $1.4 billion in federal and state stimulus funds. There will be new enterprises created for clean fleets, community access, and clean transit, as well as a new enterprise fund for non-attainment air pollution mitigation. So these are efforts where the state wants to double down and put money into electrification and air quality mitigation. It also modifies the bridge enterprise to also include tunnels, which are in need of maintenance throughout the state. It also includes freight mobility within the division of CDOT, recognizing the importance of freight in our transportation system. It also recognizes highway capacity impacts that with highway projects that they do cause adverse impacts. And so it will require agencies to do enhanced transportation planning and analysis, including greenhouse gas analysis, public health and environment, and community outreach in many languages when it comes to these big projects. We'll also create, there's also a mechanism in here for regional transportation authorities as well to allow MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, and transportation planning regions to be able to, in effect, put their own regional transportation authority into effect with a 2/3 vote, so that these MPOs and TPRs could raise their own revenues for transportation and distribute according to the ways that they would like to see in their region. And so those are some of the highlights. I've also included in your manager update, again, those summary slides that summarizes the 197-page bill. And there's also a really nice chart in there, which is new, about where these fees are coming from and exactly which funds they will be allocated to. And I will also note that in this new, in this bill, it's been clarified that there will be funding to support Front Range Passenger Rail. And that includes about $2.5 million. I'm sorry, I don't have that number correct. I'll need to go back and look at the exact number. But that funding will not fully fund Front Range Passenger Rail, but it is intended to help move us forward in the required studies to get us to the point where we could be attractive to solicit those federal dollars to support Front Range Passenger Rail in Colorado. And I know many of you are looking at this bill and have seen the summary, and so I will open it up to discussion or questions that you might have on this.
Guess we're fully briefed. We don't have any questions.
Okay.
I think Devin has his
Devin
hand
has his hand up.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks.
Good.
There may be some background noise, so tell me if it's too loud. My students just came in for their lunch, so this is what my lunch sounds like. So thanks, Sarah, for the. Do you hear that? That's crazy. My questions are regarding the transportation bill. So obviously, there's going to be an argument that's going to be about fees versus taxes. You know, that's going to be a big one. Then there's the argument about that there's new enterprises being created, which we just voted on regarding that enterprises must be voted on. And so why don't these enterprises meet that threshold? Third question would be, in addition to the local funding, Broomfield is also part of the, I believe I can't remember exactly what it's called, but the non-attainment area. And just is that correct? And so what additional monies could Broomfield expect to have for that piece of the pie? And then the last piece is more to do with the CDOT 10-year plan, which is what projects do we have needing to be funded in that 10-year plan that are not currently on that list?
Great. Thank you for those questions, Councilmember Schaaf. So in regards to fees versus taxes, this bill sponsors and the governor's office is very confident that that this bill will hold up in court if attested that these fees that are being generated will go back to support the transportation system and the initiatives and will hold up against Tabor. So they do feel like that they have the authority to put these fees in place, and that it will be held up. And I don't think that they would want to put anything out there that could end up in litigation and ultimately not be upheld. That did come up in the press conference. So I think you can listen to some of those answers, those questions and answers during that press conference. In regard to the new enterprises, that would be any new enterprises that would generate over, I believe it was 100 million of new revenue in a certain time frame. And I'll need to double check on that. But again, that they feel like that these new enterprises, which there are many of them, which could be another reason why they made so many enterprises, to be very specific in what they will achieve, that those will be consistent with the voters last year for new enterprises. And then finally, oh, I'm sorry, there were two more. So the local non-attainment. So there will be a new dedicated a fund for non-attainment areas. So Broomfield is included in that non-attainment area for the Front Range. So we would be able to access those funds for non-attainment projects and programs. And then as far as the CDOT 10-year plan, there are several projects in there that support Broomfield's priorities for Colorado 7, US 287, and the NAMS network in general. And I believe there was over $130 million that will support our projects in the Northwest. And so it may not, it does move the needle on a lot of different projects. May not fully fund all of the projects, but it's certainly a start, and we can use those funds to leverage other federal opportunities as well. Does that help provide clarity or answer your question?
Yeah, that does help. Thanks so much. With that, I mean, are there any projects that are currently not being funded as part of that 10-year plan? I mean, as this goes through, there's obviously going to be some amendments. And, you know, is there anything that Broomfield needs to advocate for ourselves in terms of those projects and potential funding?
I think at this point, I think that with the 10-year plan, as our Commissioner Karen Stewart has noted previously, it is something that is fluid, but it is something that we do need to watch to ensure that the funding identified in there does get distributed accordingly. So that's something we do need to watch for, including Colorado 7 and the I-25 Mobility Hub. I have heard that with the funding, if this is approved, with the funding that's available for the Mobility Hub, that will allow us to move forward on some key next steps for that, including possibly an interim service solution that can get us transit at that interchange more quickly. US 287 is also included in there, significant funding. And my hope is that we can advocate more specifically that some of that funding can be used for the interchange at Wadsworth, where US 287 meets US 36 and Colorado 128 and State Highway 121. So though the Wadsworth interchange is not explicit and we did request that of CDOT, I'm hoping that as these funds get distributed and projects are identified for these corridors, that we could be able to advocate for those kinds of regional projects on state highways that are important to Broomfield.
All right, can you guys hear me now? It's amazing. IT shows
Yes.
up in 5 seconds, so that's great. Any other questions on transportation specifically? Sarah, it's
Sure.
so big. You summarized that great, so thank you. I think as Guyleen said, we've been briefed. We've been anticipating this for a long time, so it's nice to finally see. And as Devin said, we anticipate there will be amendments like always. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves as it goes through the legislative process.
Absolutely, and it will be moving very, very fast. So I do know that organizations and stakeholders across the state are working very quickly to provide their final input, as I do believe the session is supposed to end around May 27th. So this is moving quickly. But again, this has been the result of a lot of stakeholder input. I think honestly, to begin with the CDOT 10-year plan in 2019, and then again last summer in the fall, the bill sponsors started reaching out, and there have been hundreds of meetings to gather input. So though the bill may not be perfect to everybody, I think many feel that this is our best path forward to see that we have real dollars going into support transportation, and looking forward to the new mobility, electrification, and making sure that we are putting funding sources to account for mitigation measures for air quality as well. So if there's any questions or concerns, please let me know. I do believe that the MCC will be working to support this, and there are some questions with the MCC currently around the Regional Transportation Authority language. And I do believe they're still discussing whether or not that's something that they want to support at this time. Before we move on, I did want to give a quick, I don't really have much of an update on Front Range Passenger Rail, but before we move on to that, any final questions, comments, or concerns? Great. So I don't have much of an update from last week on Front Range Passenger Rail. I did give an update that that the Northwest Mayors and Commissioners are working to provide amendments to the language around some focus areas. And so I'll cover those really quickly in case that most of you weren't here. But in summary, some questions around the governance structure, and the bill sponsors are very open to all of these suggestions by the stakeholders. So they will be taking them into consideration. So for example, we feel that there needs to be greater representation of the DRCOG area, and that we feel that there isn't equal representation of voices across the district when it comes to population. So we'll be making some suggestions to balance that out. Also some suggestions around milestones and contingencies, being sure that prior being asked to support a new tax, voters have a clear picture of the structure and funding plan for which the tax revenues will be used. Milestones that need to be met in order to seek voter approval of the tax, including identification of the route and a commitment from appropriate federal authorities that federal funds will be provided for the construction and initial operational costs. So putting some guardrails into this bill is something that we're seeking. We're also looking at taxation and equity, and we have some questions around the 0.8 sales tax and how they arrived at that, and if that will be enough funding to actually see the project come through. And then finally, but certainly not least, oversight and accountability. The proposed special district, it would be massive, and to a degree would be unprecedented in the state of Colorado. And as such, it should be subject to a level of oversight, transparency, and public accountability commensurate to the size and impact of the district itself. So I just wanted to provide an update on that, and that generally that the Northwest Mayors and Commissioners are moving forward with these amendments, and we'll be providing those to the bill sponsors. And that is my update on Front Range Passenger Rail. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. Any questions on that bill? Looks like Devin's maybe going for an unmute. Oh.
Yeah, I did. I held this question off because I was hoping that you would talk about it. There is overlap between the transportation bill and the Front Range Passenger Rail bill. So there's money that's allocated in that transportation bill at this point, and that's a sizable amount of money. What is that money going to be doing, and kind of what are those kind of those guardrails around that money?
Sure. So the funding that's dedicated in the transportation bill is intended to support the next steps of planning and study that's federally required to get to NEPA. So the work that we've done so far is not considered by the federal government NEPA ready. So we are working on the Front Range Passenger Rail Commission is working on those next steps, but more funding is needed to get there. And so once we get to that NEPA level, we believe that we'll be able to provide enough information to present to interested parties that this corridor is viable and is suitable for federal investment for passenger rail.
And Sarah, I'm just going to unmute myself. Sorry. Appreciate these questions and all of this and all this different input. It's really great. I'm curious as to, what sort of accountability moving forward with it, because a lot of people are just really hesitant about it. I know Adams County we've talked about it in CC4CA and at DRCOG, and Adams County is saying yes, but, and so what does that accountability look like?
Great, thank you, Councilmember Hankel. Those are really great questions. So I'm pulling it up. So I've included in your city manager update some information that they've provided in summary of how they will approach accountability and transparency. So each enterprise will be developing a 10-year plan that will be used to assess the funding levels needed to achieve the desired outcomes. Project management Public dashboards will show key performance indicators for projects within the enterprises and CDOT. And CDOT will update their existing 10-year plan along the way. As far as for accountability, CDOT and enterprises will also maintain a clear accountability mechanisms, including a wide variety of stakeholders to ensure funding achieves intended outcomes, and will regularly report to the Transportation Commission, legislature, and construction partners. With transparency, the enterprises will maintain accessible and transparent summary information regarding implementation status, funding, expenditures available on their website and available to the public. CDOT will continue their new commitment to enhanced accountability and transparent measures that you'll see on their website, that they've worked really hard to try to increase transparency around that. A good example is the CDOT 10-year plan, in how the projects were arrived at, where they will go, how much money, which districts, who will benefit from them. And so, as a piece of the 10-year plan that's associated with this bill, at least as far as the projects go, it's very transparent in that regard, in addition to what they'll be doing for the new enterprises. And as far as the climate goals, the Colorado Energy Office and CDPHE will be working with CDOT to report annually on their progress on the 2030 EV plan and greenhouse gas roadmap that results from the new enterprises and transportation investments in this plan.
And so those
are some of the highlights.
Okay, I'll definitely read that. I feel bad you read all that, and I can read it myself, but I think that's it's good to just sort of talk about it too and have that discussion. It sounds like it's very transparent top down. Is it transparent bottom up? Meaning, are we going to receive constant, feedback from the people? When did they address that?
So I can't speak to the specific language of that, but I do believe in how they're developing the enterprises and who will be represented on those, that there will be significant outreach in the representation on those groups. I know, for example, Commuting Solutions would like to advocate to ensure that there's a voice for transportation demand management organizations, for the non-attainment fund. So a lot of these details will need to be worked out as these enterprises get spooled up. But I do believe that is part of their engagement effort to ensure people are involved along the way.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
Great. I don't see any other hands raised, but I wanted to just take a minute. Are there any other questions on Front Range Passenger Rail for Sarah? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Then we'll just kind of jump in. I have just a couple of updates. Like I said, the news has been really, really fun this past week to follow. So as you all know, there was a $34.1 billion budget was approved for this next fiscal year. It's sent to the governor right now. He has not signed it yet. It was $4 billion more than our current budget for the state. So that was a big bill that moved through, and a lot of work with the JBC. And then following that, as we kind of talked about in other legislative updates, we kind of have the two pieces. Jean, I always think of you of the cart before the horse, or which way does it go with stimulus funds. And so right now the legislature is working on how they spend those stimulus dollars and what that looks like. And so earlier this week, there were 10 stimulus bills introduced. And I'm just going to give a couple of highlights on the ones that I think align with council priorities or that you'd want to have on your radar. One was $13 million to the Department of Local Affairs for affordable housing. It did pass on party line. Another one was $3 million to the Department of Human Services. And essentially what it is to try to get a 50% match from the federal government for the Employment First program, as well as to increase funding for SNAP. So they're hoping if they can get this funding allocated at the state level, they'll get a 50% match from the federal government, and then we'll have more money to support these two areas. Another one was $5 million in grants to local governments, which would be obviously great as a local government. And it's supposed to help with pandemic loss and education. Another one is for businesses, and this includes restaurants. We've talked a lot about how restaurants have struggled and businesses during the pandemic to stay open. The bill would deduct $70,000 in their taxes from June to August 2021. So that would be a big tax write-off for the businesses to help them stay afloat as we hopefully come out of this year of a really hard pandemic and financial environment for a lot of businesses. And then the other one I just wanted to put on your radar, it was probably the most controversial of the 10 stimulus packages introduced. It was House Bill 1285. It was $10 million to put into the state's art and film industry. I'm sure maybe you saw in the news it barely passed after hours of debate. It was incredibly controversial, but it did pass out of the committee. So we'll continue to track these stimulus dollars as they move through. As Sarah mentioned, we anticipate that the session will end on the 27th. As I mentioned earlier, they can go until June 12th based on that 120-day calendar, but that's what they're throwing around right now, and we'll continue to track that as we get closer to that date. So those are the big ones on money. Some other ones that have been thrown around with the collective bargaining, I'm sure maybe many of you saw the email CCAT and CML had sent out, but the rumor is that there will not be a bill introduced this year. It sounds like the sponsors on this bill are going to step back and focus on working with local jurisdictions. There's a lot of concerns about how mandates could impact the local control, specifically that CML's concern. And so they will be working with different jurisdictions to figure that out with hopes of introducing it in the 2022 session. As you know, that could change, but that's the rumor right now that we will not see a bill. Lori, I see you on my screen. Another bill was around the potency for marijuana. There was an article, and Jean, I think maybe you sent it. If not, I apologize, from Westward that came out that says it doesn't look like they will drop any bills this year around that topic, but that the work will continue in the interim. And that hopefully it will come back in 2022. So we'll keep monitoring and watching those, but those were two that were kind of on our radar that it sounds like are not going to happen this year as we run out of time and have large bills like the transportation bill. Kylene, I see your hand went up.
Yeah, so you were talking about the plastic management bill 1162 with the CML opposition, or no, we didn't get to that one yet.
Not yet. That's on my list next though.
Okay.
Yeah, that one's still moving. So the collective bargaining and the marijuana potency, I would say, I mean, the PI doesn't fit because there was no bill to postpone indefinitely, but I would say they're just a done conversation for the 2021 session. And I think those are the ones we were tracking that I don't anticipate further action on. And so now we'll move into kind of those controversial ones that are still moving and have been introduced. And the first one is 1162. Kylene, that you mentioned, the management of plastic products. I did watch the legislative update from last week, and I know there was a lot of time spent on that conversation. Some big updates just on Wednesday. It passed the House Committee of the Whole and is now on to the Senate. It is not on the calendar yet, but it has passed. I don't know if you watched any of the debate on the 5th, but there were 20 Republican amendments introduced. They were all shut down and the debate took almost 4 hours. So it's safe to say it's a controversial bill and that we'll probably see those same party lines come out in the Senate as well. Again, it's just the fees collected. The biggest concern right now is that they feel like the mandate of putting in the fee for single-use plastics, where the local jurisdiction gets 60% and then the business gets 40%, that it's going to have an unintended mandate, right, of the enforcement side. And so that's really where it seems like the rub is right now on that bill. It is not scheduled in the Senate yet, so it has not been referred to a committee and there is no hearing date, but we are monitoring that and anticipate another marathon debate in the Senate as well.
Well, if we've learned nothing from Tabor and Gallagher, we should probably not put formulas fixed. They should be left flexible for local control, right? I mean, that's where we get into trouble. But I read something where the mandate, was kind of being spun as taking away local control. But to me, it's really just about lifting that preemption so that local municipalities can make the decision for themselves. It's not forcing it. It shouldn't be forcing anything on anyone. But, again, with the formulas, lesson learned there.
Yeah, it's so hard on these bills because the intent is there, right? Like the intent is good, but the practical application sometimes just is missed, and so then it gets stuck in. That's
Right.
It can kill a good intention bill because of some bad, a little
Too
paragraph that could have not been in.
draconian, too state mandated. I get it. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for the update.
Yeah, thanks, Kylene. Jean, I see you have your hand up too.
Yeah, has the governor stated anything about if he would veto this bill if it passed? I mean, he's made a statement that he's going to veto SB 21-200 if it passes. And this is, kind of not as widely, but kind of in the realm of, a mandate that sometimes he doesn't feel good about. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that. I was just trying to get through the Colorado politic updates because normally that is where I haven't seen any word on that. I was going to talk about Senate Bill 200. I think you probably all saw the article that came out this week where he got incredibly attacked, right, as a Democrat governor who passed the greenhouse gas goals, not following through on the accountability piece. I think the article said that for that bill specifically, he said that it was a dictator level power and control given to an unelected board. I think it was a pretty strong statement that he made around that bill, and we will discuss that one. I know Heidi said she had to jump off, but as you saw in the council email, she requested discussing that on Tuesday. So we'll do another update on all of these at Tuesday council meeting. But Jean, in regards to your question, I have not seen any public news about him saying that he would veto this.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but that doesn't, we'll see, that could change by tomorrow. So we'll keep watching. Devin, I saw you turned on your video. Did you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick to that point. So when we discuss these on Tuesday, the process now is that we're not going to prepare official resolutions for those votes on specific bills. And so we don't have to send those, which is a little bit different than our rules and procedures. So we don't have to send those bills to staff to say that we would like council to consider supporting these. We can bring these up as a motion on Tuesday's support. Is that the process? So if for instance, I wanted to bring up the council support for the transportation bill, I'm just going to bring that up for a motion on Tuesday night, correct?
Yeah, and I'm looking at Nancy because we spend a lot of time, Devin, reviewing the rules and procedures, and it says that council can support legislation by a resolution or a motion. And so the rules do allow you to do that. And what we found is with things moving so fast, we put these resolutions together with clauses, and then the bill is completely different before you all vote on it. And so the hope is, based on the feedback with you guys pre-adopting the policy statements, us getting ahead of everything, is that then it can be dynamic and fluid in the meeting. So yes, you would be able to say, I think still sending it in advance is helpful because then I can be a little more prepared. And then also to your point, Devin, with like the firework regulation, then I could send some information. Like I tried to give council, here's a link to the bill just ahead of time. So we can help give that background information, but absolutely, Nancy, is that correct? The way we understand the rules and procedures is you could make the motion and then just write the caveat with legislation is just that 2/3 vote of the entire council, which can sometimes be hard to get. Oh, you're muted, Nancy.
I thought I hit it. It is the efficiency issue and the changing bills. We dropped a resolution today and something changes over the weekend. So we can still do resolutions, especially, and it might be appropriate on something like the transportation bill, let's say, or something really big where we wanted some of those whereas clauses. So we still have that option, of course.
Perfect. That was a good question, Devin. So thanks for clarifying that. Okay. Any questions on those bills? I have a couple more updates as well. Let me jump to my other sheet.
So I just want to clarify that because I pulled up our rules and procedures and in 9.3 B, it talks about requests should be submitted to the city manager, include the mayor and all council members by noon the Wednesday prior to the meeting in order to meet the agenda schedule. So that piece is in there right now. And that would be the only thing that if we were to bring up a motion on Tuesday night, it wouldn't necessarily be following that clause of the rules and procedures.
I'm going to let Nancy answer that question, but I will say one thing that we've realized is things have changed so much. A lot of council's rules and procedures, right, around the amendment conversation. I know, Lori, you asked, then does this open Pandora's box of all of these other changes we need to make? We are looking at having a more in-depth conversation at a future focus session because, Devin, things aren't aligning as we're moving fast and adapting. So, but in regards to current practice and current rules and regulations, Nancy, do you want to clarify that?
Yeah, thanks for pointing that provision out, Devin. And it was that should and that encouragement that Danae was talking about. If you can meet that deadline, please do. But it's not a shall because of the fast-moving nature of legislation. So I don't think it would prohibit you from bringing the motion at the meeting if you didn't make that Wednesday deadline.
Perfect. Devin, any more questions on that before we move on?
No, that's all I have. And actually, I got to get going. I got my class is taking a vote on who's going to be the teacher instead of me. So I better get going.
Thanks, Devin. Take care.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Maybe we should get them to do a straw poll on the transportation bill.
That would be fun. A little classroom activity. Okay, let's see. Just a couple more updates. Let me see what else I had for today. One we wanted to talk about, so 21-1030 House Bill, which was expanding the Peace Officers Mental Health Grant Program. That's had some movement. It's now in the House Appropriations today, and we just wanted to put that, if it does pass, it would mean that there would be grant funding available for local governments to apply to provide mental health services to our peace officers, which in alignment with council priority is something that we will continue to track. Let's see, the House Bill 21-1110, the Colorado Laws for Persons with Disabilities. So essentially the bill strengthens state discrimination laws for individuals with disabilities by adding 3 discrimination violations. An additional thing to this is it puts the Office of Information Technology to improve their websites for accessibility. And so that's the piece we're trying to figure out right now. The definition of public entity includes local government, so we would fit within this bill's purview. And we're trying to figure out if OIT adopts accessibility standards, how does that impact what we currently do for our access on our websites, things like that. So it was passed by the House Committee of the Whole just today, and we'll continue to monitor that in alignment with the DEAI priority. Let's see, you guys have talked a lot about House Bill 1117, which is the Promote Affordable Housing Bill. It was laid over in the House. They're currently considering the Senate amendments. There were substantial amendments to that bill, so we're continuing to monitor where that will land. Let's see. The criminal justice reform bills are continuing to move through. Lots of amendments on those we anticipate in the committee work, so we'll keep following those and see if they move into the committee of the whole. Let's see. I think the only other big one that we wanted to put on everybody's radar that has been was the Metro Districts conversation. So we had talked about it, I think last week, and the bill had not been introduced. It's now introduced. It's Senate Bill 21-262. It's called Special District Transparency. We kind of talked about what we thought it was going to accomplish, but now we know it's a new transparency mandate, which essentially makes sure that the basic requirements for a special district to maintain a website, make sure that you know who the board members are, how you can contact them. They would be required to share financial information. And in addition, it requires an annual report that they would have to submit. There are currently over 2,000 metro districts in Colorado. So there would be an impact across the board, with the intent being right to update metro district practices, while also still giving local governments the opportunity to continue to build infrastructure in communities. I know we've talked about this a lot in Broomfield and how we use metro districts. So the hope is to find a little bit more accountability and transparency of the metro districts, but to still give local government that opportunity. I will say it's anticipated to kind of move through, but we're getting a lot of feedback from builders right now. Their perspective is that it does limit local control. From what I've heard from CML's perspective of the bill, that isn't necessarily a concern as far as I've heard, but we'll continue to monitor it now that we actually have a bill with some bill language. So those were the bills that were on our highlight sheet to cover. Any questions, or are there any additional bills we didn't cover that you'd like an update on? Jean, I see your hand.
Well, I guess, I mean, Heidi jumped off, so I know she had proposed that we vote on support of SB 21-200, which, in general, from what I've read, and supporting. I did see in the CC4CA update that there's some hesitation among some of their members that have municipal utilities. So what I was going to do now, if Heidi was on, was ask her what that's all about, because I can ask her in the background, but I don't want to bring that up particularly on Tuesday if I can get that addressed beforehand. So that was my question, was what CC4CA members are hesitant about it, and why.
I've seen the emails for CC4CA, Jean, and I haven't seen any specifics on that, but let me look after this meeting and see if I can find something for you. And if so, I'll put it into this link that I'll share in the CMO update so that you can see the text, if that works. Let me try to see if I can find some more information. I do know it did get a hearing scheduled, so it is scheduled for the 12th in Senate Appropriations, and so we'll be able to see what that looks like there as well. But let me look into that. I don't have an answer right now, but I can follow up with you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Lori, I saw you had your hand up, but now it's not up. Did you get your question answered?
No, but it was the same. I feel like we should discuss the details of SB 21-200. If there's because I think we should support it. I'm just like, but I would like to know, if there's any information that we should be aware of. It would be good to have that ahead of a discussion on Tuesday.
Well, CCAT is supporting it.
Yeah, CCAT took a stand. CC4CA was monitoring with some concerns. And I think, again, right, they try to take the position of the entire membership. And then CML took a position of monitoring, but they are recommending amendments to it. So I'll follow up and get some more information into the legislative update that goes out this afternoon specifically on that bill. And we'll put it specifically so you don't have to click out of it so that you can have that. And then if there's any more questions, just let me know.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. That'd be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'll reach out to Tammy too, because I know her and like Camille and her team have been tracking it. So I'll follow up with her as well before then. Great. Any other questions? I mean, those are kind of the big bills right now that we're following, and it will be hopefully we'll see how the next few weeks, but we think it will continue to be contentious, and it will be interesting to see where the transportation bill goes and a lot of these that are divided on party lines. So with that, we'll give you 10 minutes back in this beautiful day, and we'll get an update in the CMO weekly update.
Danae, can I ask you one more quick question? And I lost my train of thought again here on this piece. One of the reasons that the governor noted for vetoing this plan to veto SB 200 was not putting this control in the AQCC as an unelected body. Yet the legislature has there is one of like the Colorado Sun editorials or somewhere that I read this, but yet the legislature has that ability to create laws that would, if they don't like what they see, they actually have that authority. Like this is something where like we want to retain authority over something like the housing authority, local housing authority. Like we have that ability to, still do something if we didn't think that they were doing exactly what we wanted to. And that's the same situation here, I think, where if the AQCC is going down a path that the state isn't, like that's not what they were thinking, they have that ability to create laws to put them back on path or something. I think something in that realm would be super helpful to really understand, is there justification for this concern that the governor is stating? Because it sounds like that's not really, that they still have, maybe Jennifer has the answer here, that it's not as scary as it seems from his standpoint. Thank you.
I don't think it's as excuse me, as scary as it seems. There's two pending amendments right now that will not completely alleviate those concerns, Lori. And so part of it is there's a difference between a policymaking body that requires a legislative oversight. So when we're talking about the housing authority, you all control on the front end with regards to budget and with regards to overall council policies from an alignment perspective. So although it's an independent board, anybody that controls the purse strings and the alignment of policy, there's a lot more control there. What this bill does is we're going to have independent decision making. And then what's going to happen is if we don't like what the outcome is, we'll legislate out of that. That's a big difference. So generally it takes anywhere from, it's pretty swift to go from one legislative session to the next legislative session. But on these fundamentals, if something is, if it's implemented and companies, nonprofits, local governments, the state as a whole has to start abiding by a certain dictate, if you will, it's hard to roll that back after, right? So even legislatively, because then you start getting these pendulum swings and you don't have the sustainable components of, let's all agree on the front end what those guidelines are, and then the implementation is different. So from Polis's perspective, it's just, it's not a unilateral approach that we need to fix after the fact. So those two amendments, one, from my contacts down there, might get him to yes, but it's not a fundamental impact. The other one's a fundamental impact. So we'll have to see how the sponsors of SB 200 respond to, essentially, it's interesting that you should bring up the Independent Housing Authority, because those are the conversations, quite frankly, from Lisa Kaufman. And I look at Guyleen when I say this because she knows Lisa well to be able to say, these pieces have to be in place before the implementation, or people are going to spend or invest or base their budgets on something may not be applicable during the next legislative session. So it's less about power and control, and it's more about, let's make sure that at least there's some guardrails on the front end. Does that answer the, I know that's probably not what you wanted to hear, huh?
No, the guardrail conversation is always going to be a factor because, of these unintended consequences. I understand the concerns, I do, and how it's going to impact, especially municipalities that are utility providers. Mm-hmm. But how many actually are? I just wonder. I know Longmont is, but is that common? Does anybody have any clue?
It isn't common, Guyleen.
It isn't.
It isn't, and again, it costs so much money to become a utility provider unless your structure is not set up that way in the front end. Longmont would have never gone to their own broadband had they not already had that infrastructure. And so the bigger.
Not only that, they've had to sell buildings to keep this up. They're operating at a cost negative to provide municipal broadband. And that's the part that people leave out. They're like, Longmont offers this 1 gig for $50 a month, but they're going broke because of it. They've had to sell property to pay for this. And that's exactly not the win-win that everybody's trying to play it. And I know we just have to educate people, but it, knowing what it's cost them to do this, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Nor would I. And so again, when you're banking on something happening, so from Longmont's perspective, when they went out and said, hey, 5 gigs, $49.99, that was based on 20,000 people signing up on the front end. So when 7,000 people sign up on the front end, that gap is, it's substantial. To your point, Guyleen, it's expensive to be a utility, and it gets back to that unintended consequences without a doubt. So hopefully they'll be able to find those guardrails on the front end. And it's like we've talked about before, you all through this whole legislative process, bill sponsors, they know what they want to happen when they draft that bill. And then there's that line in the sand to be able to say, you're diluting significantly what our original intent was. And so now they just need to make a decision about, are they willing to acquiesce on some things for the governor not to veto it? He doesn't want to veto this bill. I mean, again, the premise of the reduction of greenhouse gases, it's in all of the portfolios with regards to the state, right? It's just that unilateral control and it's unilateral control on the front end, but it takes an awful lot. And a lot of people are going to be swinging in the interim and on the back end. And that's really the problem.
Well, they're swinging now at him because of just the whole rumor mill. I mean, he's getting skewered.
Yeah. Well, because it's counter to what he's been saying he wants.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's the devil's always in the details, boys. When you come out certifying something without knowing what those details are, it's a perilous path. Danae, oh, I see your interns here.
Yeah, this is Shaylee. Dean, I see you did you raise your hand? It went away.
Well, I just had a follow-up. I mean, I understand, well, he used a few words that I think set him up to be skewered. I mean, you don't call something draconian, board and all that kind of stuff and not expect some backlash. I'm thinking, why did he choose those words if he didn't want to get skewered? And I guess the other thing I would say is, from looking at the greenhouse gas roadmap, that is not specific. That is, we were following that, in ACES, we were following that. And, we had expectations, that was going to help us meet our goals, our local goals. And it came out and it's not specific. So, we need something in the state that's more specific. So, if he was more sincere up front, I guess, about making sure that the state agency came out with a more specific greenhouse goal roadmap, then it would have set him up less for criticism too, I would say. So those are my comments.
I absolutely agree. Again, it's that it is the devil in the details. So a strategic plan is only as good as those that execute it. So there's a whole lot of strategic plans that are out there and roadmaps, right? And so again, it's managing expectations from the front end. And Jean, just a little bit of the backstory with the bill sponsors. They're in I was going to use a little more adult language, but since Shaylee's joining us, they're in an ego turf battle right now. And so this was the shot over the bow to an inappropriate sense, right? To your point, draconian. Okay, well, so those are words like the I told you so, right? When has that ever been effective when somebody says that? Or calm down, right? Draconian has that same visceral, you're not going to have a conversation after that. So they're in a tit for tat now. And so we'll have to see who prevails to be able to say, okay, that's enough. How do we push this forward together and put our egos outside and do what's best for Colorado? Is that going to happen? I don't know, because the gloves are off now. And then by then it's hard to walk back. Lori?
Yeah, so I think I think you're kind of answering this question now too, because this is the other part that just has been in my mind for a while, is why would he go out on something like climate has been such a leading initiative, why would you go out and just say, I'm just going to veto that, as opposed to just like the statement being, we need to keep making progress, but we need to, like, these are the couple pieces. Why would he, such a strong statement instead of just saying, these are my two concerns, but we can fix this? Like, why would, and you think maybe that's also in that whole, maybe not a willingness to move, and maybe, I just think there's an easier way than to veto something that's so important. That's what's been on my mind, along with the other.
Absolutely. And so, nobody can really answer that but them, but knowing that to go public against a premise that you have built your entire platform on, right? Clean energy. So there was a lot of behind the scenes that culminated into this. So it wasn't the first time I heard the conversation and then came out and said it's a draconian approach. There was a lot of give and take, and we've seen similar circumstances on the police reform bills, right? On Senate Bill 62, where you're just so firm out of the gate. It doesn't promote that ability to have that dialogue. So both sides are equally combative at this point. But again, going public, using those buzzwords, to Jean's point, generally means that no one wants to be forced into having a conversation. And so now that he's gone so public, now it's just one up, which is a shame, because, geez, if they could just acquiesce to the guardrails on the front end, whether it's, whatever that looks like, same conversation, to Jean's point, that we're going to have on the Independent Housing Authority, right? I mean, defining what independent means. Same conversation that we had with the bifurcated, and Guyleen was such a pivotal player, really pushing staff to ensure that those components on that bifurcated board, that there was an alignment. So if you're going to give something up, those guardrails have to really be in place. And those conversations didn't happen on this bill, and it's too bad.
Are we going to be tracking any of the more recent legislation? Like, I know Representative Herod introduced a bill about ketamine use.
So
I'm really interested. Go on.
I had a big, a lengthy conversation, Guyleen, with Matt Gray on, let me pull that. I'm not at my computer. I couldn't get my computer to work. Danae, there's two new PD bills. I think it's 2150 and what is the other? So there's the ketamine bill that falls under the restraint. And then there is the.
They are, let me just pull them up. I had them in.
Have you added those to the matrix yet?
I did. And so it's 1251, which was the appropriate use of chemical restraints.
Mm-hmm.
So and then 1250. And which is concerning measures to address the law enforcement accountability that came, and it's expanding the requirements from SB 217.
So 1251 is the cleanup bill. Let's let that hope. I mean, again, folks were hoping that it would go a little bit further than it did with regards to the cleanup. But really, Guyleen, the ketamine bill, and that was heard today. Actually, I think it's on at 1:30 today. So Matt and I were talking about it after the bunny rescue conversation. I know he followed up with you yesterday too. But on this bill, the concerns are that police officers don't administer ketamine. They never have. It's never been in their purview. The language the way that it's drafted right now, it would hold law enforcement accountable at the scene for the administration of that ketamine. So the key points of reworking some, and she's open to the amendments. So this isn't one of the ones like 217 where it's an 11th hour. Again, this was the kind of the first introduction piece. So the real pushback is liability from law enforcement being held responsible to the outcome of what occurs because they're on scene. The other piece of the restraint is really solidifying. We all know, you know, from the George Floyd, you had one officer, you know, committing homicide in front of 3 other officers. So that restraint compels the other officers that are on the scene, when you have one or more that's administrating a type of restraint, you're compelled to take action. So it's not that you're going to be okay if you take severe action, you're going to be held liable if you don't. And so those big pieces of really, it's, you know, between the EMTs, I think we talked about it a little bit last week, that administering ketamine, the chemical composition, because it's such a lethal drug, there's not a lot of variance. So you can't eye somebody and say they look 6'2" and 145 pounds versus they're 5'9" and 240 pounds, right? I mean,
and in the case I'm referring to, which we're all familiar with, according to the independent review, they didn't even examine the subject. They didn't even check his vitals. They didn't even touch him. They just shot him up.
Yeah, they eyed him. So this bill is specifically to include all of those that are at the scene, right? So between the EMTs and fire rescue and law enforcement, but they've coupled it under a full ketamine restraint bill. So you'll see some movement on that. I don't think anybody is saying that the pieces of that bill aren't warranted. It's like anything else with legislation, right? It's the application and the unintended consequences. So there's a lot more to come on those, Guyleen.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I just keep thinking how there was this confusion over, you know, the transfer of care of the patient or the prisoner to the patient, and it was just very foggy. And I know they've made some changes in Aurora since then, but it was kind of like, who was in charge of this person, you know, at what point, and who was responsible for their care and they became incapacitated.
And you have the verbiage down just exactly right? Is it a detainee or is it a patient?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very different mindset. And so those are part of the so although it's not part of the language in the bill, the ideology that's leading to that, you know, it's like our, you know, people before process. So it's like anything else. It's that sheer balance of what that looks like. Ketamine's no joke. I mean,
I know. Well,
you know,
I know. I mean, it's still happening in other places.
Yeah.
Killing people.
So, and it's interesting too, so Guyleen, to your point, I know we've talked about this before, but chokeholds being just universally accepted, always have been. I mean, again, part of the training. And it's interesting that the kind of the culture and the philosophical approach. My guess is ketamine's going to be the same thing, right? I mean, 5 years from now, everybody's going to be saying, she administered ketamine on site, kind of sight unseen from weight, medical, you know, again, exhausting all of
medical
those.
History. Number one.
Yeah. No, the chief was, the chief sent, they had wanted him to weigh in on both of those bills. Danae, I think they're today at 1:30. One may have already gone through on first reading. So he and I had a good conversation about it, Guyleen, and then followed up with Matt on that. So we'll continue to track that.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Never a dull moment when the legislature's in, right, Danae?
No, it's so fun though. Now we have Shaylee's hook too, so it is fun. Anything else? I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. And Lori and Jean, I reached out to Tammy and Camille and Andrew to see about some of that CC4CA, and we'll try to have it in the weekly update this afternoon as follow-up. But anything else besides those things? Great. Well, thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
You guys too. Welcome to the team, Shaylee, and thanks for participating with us.
Yeah, I
Let
look
us know
forward to
if you have
meeting
any
you,
questions.
Shaylee. I haven't met you yet, but I'm sure looking forward to it.
Yeah, me
Danae
too.
and Todd, can you stay on? I wanted to follow up on the Canvas board and.
Well, thanks, Todd and Danae and Jen and Nancy. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Aaron, if we stay on this call, will it go into the recording?
I will go and turn off the recording, so it's.
Okay, perfect.